Legitimacy political types. Legitimacy is a value whereby something or someone is recognized and accepted as right and proper. In political science, legitimacy usually is understood as the popular acceptance and recognition by the public of the authority of a governing regime whereby authority has political power through consent and mutual understandings, not coercion. The three types of political legitimacy described by German sociologist Max Weber are traditional, charismatic, and rational legal. Traditional legitimacy derives from societal custom and habit that emphasize the history of the authority of tradition. Traditionalists understand this form of rule as historically accepted, hence its continuity, because it is the way society has always been. Therefore, the institutions of traditional government usually are historically continuous, as in monarchy and tribalism. Charismatic legitimacy derives from the ideas and personal charisma of the leader, a person whose authoritative persona charms and psychologically dominates the people of the society to agreement with the government's regime and rule. A charismatic government usually features weak political and administrative institutions because they derive authority from the persona of the leader, and usually disappear without the leader in power. However, if the charismatic leader has a successor, a government derived from charismatic legitimacy might continue. Rational legal legitimacy derives from a system of institutional procedure wherein government institutions establish and enforce law and order in the public interest. Therefore, it is through public trust that the government will abide the law that confers rational legal legitimacy. Forms. Numinous legitimacy. In a theocracy, government legitimacy derives from the spiritual authority of a god or a goddess. In ancient Egypt c. 3150 BC, the legitimacy of the dominion of a pharaoh god-king was theologically established by doctrine that posited the pharaoh as the Egyptian patron god Horus, son of Osiris. In the Roman Catholic Church, the jurisdiction of its hierarchy derives its legitimacy from a divine source. The Catholic magisterium dogmatically teaches that the Pope and the bishops, as the successors of St. Peter and the apostles respectively, possess ordinary jurisdiction over the Church, which was given by Jesus Christ to the latter, with the Pope as the successor. Civil legitimacy. The political legitimacy of a civil government derives from agreement among the autonomous constituent institutions legislative, judicial, executive combined for the national common good. One way civil society grants legitimacy to governments is through public elections. There are also those who refute the legitimacy offered by public elections, pointing out that the amount of legitimacy public elections can grant depends significantly on the electoral system conducting the elections. In the United States, this issue has surfaced around how voting is impacted by gerrymandering, the United States Electoral College's ability to produce winners by minority rule and discouragement of voter turnout outside of swing states, and the repeal of part of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. Another challenge to the political legitimacy offered by elections is whether or not marginalized groups such as women or those who are incarcerated are allowed to vote. Civil legitimacy can be granted through different measures for accountability than voting, such as financial transparency and stakeholder accountability. In the international system, another method for measuring civil legitimacy is through accountability to international human rights norms. In an effort to determine what makes a government legitimate, the Center for Public Impact launched a project to hold a global conversation about legitimacy, inviting citizens, academics, and governments to participate. The organization also publishes case studies that consider the theme of legitimacy as it applies to projects in a number of different countries, including Bristol, Lebanon, and Canada. Good governance vs. bad governance. The United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commission (OCHR) established standards of what is considered good governance that include the key attributes transparency, responsibility, accountability, participation, and responsiveness to the needs of the people. Input, output, and throughput legitimacies. Legitimacies. Assessing the political legitimacy of a government can be done by looking at three different aspects of which a government can derive legitimacy. Fritz Scharpf introduced two normative criteria, which are output legitimacy, i.e., the effectiveness of policy outcomes for people, and input legitimacy, the responsiveness to citizen concerns as a result of participation by the people. A third normative criterion was added by Vivian Schmidt, who analyzes legitimacy also in terms of what she calls throughput, i.e., the governance processes that happen in between input and output. Negative and positive legitimacy. Obiloff distinguishes between negative political legitimacy and PL, which is about the object of legitimation answering what is legitimate, and positive political legitimacy PPL, which is about the source of legitimation answering who is the legitimator. NPL is concerned with establishing where to draw the line between good and bad, PPL with who should be drawing it in the first place. From the NPL perspective, political legitimacy emanates from appropriate actions. From a PPL perspective, it emanates from appropriate actors. In the social contract tradition, Hobbes and Locke focused on NPL stressing security and liberty, respectively, while Rousseau focused more on PPL, the people, as the legitimator. Arguably, political stability depends on both forms of legitimacy. Instrumental and substantive legitimacy. Weber's understanding of legitimacy rests on shared values such as tradition and rational legality. But policies that aim at reconstructing legitimacy by improving the service delivery or output of a state often only respond to shared needs. Therefore, substantive sources of legitimacy need to be distinguished from more instrumental ones. Instrumental legitimacy rests on the rational assessment of the usefulness of an authority, and describing to what extent an authority responds to shared needs. Instrumental legitimacy is very much based on the perceived effectiveness of service delivery. Conversely, substantive legitimacy is a more abstract normative judgment, which is underpinned by shared value. Perceived legitimacy. Establishing legitimacy is not simply transactional. Service provision, elections, and rule of law do not automatically grant legitimacy. State legitimacy rests on citizens' perceptions and expectations of the state, and these are co-constructed between state actors and citizens. What legitimizes a state is also contextually specific. McAuliffe et al. 2020 show that in different countries, provision of different services builds state legitimacy. In Nepal, public water provision was most associated with state legitimacy, while in Pakistan, it was health services. Forms of legitimate government. In determining the political legitimacy of a system of rule and government, the term proper political legitimacy is philosophically and essentially contested concept that facilitates understanding the different applications and interpretations of abstract, qualitative, and evaluative concepts such as art, social justice, etc., as applied in aesthetics, political. Therefore, in defining the political legitimacy of a system of government and rule, the term essentially contested concept indicates that a key term, communism, democracy, constitutionalism, etc., has different meanings within a given political argument. Hence, the intellectually restrictive politics of dogmatism, my answer is right, and all others are wrong, skepticism, I don't know what is true, and I even doubt my own opinion, and eclecticism, each meaning gives a partial view, so the more meanings the better, are inappropriate philosophic stances for managing a political term that has more than one meaning. See Wall. Establishing what qualifies as a legitimate form of government continues to be a topic of great philosophical controversy. Forms of legitimate government are posited to include communism, where the legitimacy of a communist state derives from having won a civil war, a revolution, or from having won an election such as the presidency of Salvador Allende 1970-73 in Chile. Thus, the actions of the communist government are legitimate, authorized by the people. In the early 20th century, communist parties based the arguments supporting the legitimacy of their rule and government upon the scientific nature of Marxism. See dialectical materialism. Constitutionalism. where the modern political concept of constitutionalism establishes the law as supreme over the private will by integrating nationalism, democracy, and limited government. The political legitimacy of constitutionalism derives from popular belief and acceptance that the actions of the government are legitimate because they abide by the law codified in the political constitution. The political scientist Carl Joachim Friedrich (1901–1984) said that, in dividing political power among the organs of government, constitutional law effectively restrains the actions of the government. See checks and balances. Democracy, where government legitimacy derives from the popular perception that the elected government abides by democratic principles in governing and thus is legally accountable to its people. Fascism, where in the 1920s and the 1930s it based its political legitimacy upon the arguments of traditional authority, respectively, the German National Socialists and the Italian Fascists claimed that the political legitimacy of their right to rule derived from philosophically denying the popular political legitimacy of elected liberal democratic government. During the Weimar Republic 1918–1933, the political philosopher Carl Schmitt (1888–1985), whose legal work as the crown jurist of the Third Reich promoted fascism and deconstructed liberal democracy, addressed the matter in Legalität und Lid. Monarchy, where the divine right of kings establishes the political legitimacy of the rule of the monarch, king or queen. Legitimacy also derives from the popular perception, tradition, and custom, and acceptance of the monarch as the rightful ruler of nation and country. Contemporarily, such divine right legitimacy is manifest in the absolute monarchy of the House of Saud Est, 1744, a royal family who have ruled and governed Saudi Arabia since the 18th century. Moreover, constitutional monarchy is a variant form of monarchic political legitimacy which combines traditional authority and legal rational authority, by which means the monarch maintains nationalist unity, one people and democratic administration, a political constitution.